and welcome to Pursue Your Summits, Living a Meaningful Life. My name is Brent Robertson. I'm the Dean of Greenwood Library. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome you, and especially to welcome our distinguished speaker this evening, Dr. Renee Kessler. It's wonderful to see your familiar, friendly face again here on campus. It is a pleasure to be co-sponsoring this event on behalf of the library with our friends from CAPS, Longwood's Counseling and Psychological Services. This evening I have three responsibilities, and I take them very, very seriously. Number one, my first assignment is to welcome you. Check. Number two, my second assignment is to invite you to the reception, which has already commenced. And to invite you, are there any chicken cordon bleu bites left? That was my idea, so I'm going to take full credit for that. There are excellent edibles for all to enjoy, so please, by all means, take some from the road. My third task is to tell you a little bit about the grant that has made this series of wellness-themed events possible. So as a history major, of course, any history majors here? Okay, good. I can tell you what history majors think. As a history major, I take very, very seriously the importance of having background and context as a means of understanding any given point in time. So to give adequate background and context for this grant, for this event, for this evening, naturally I reflect and point my mind towards the month of March in the year 1212. So that's where I'll start. As many of you are aware, 1212, 1211, 1212, very difficult, tumultuous, tough times in Japan. There were earthquakes, famines, fires, pestilence, wars, all kinds of things going on, striking throughout the country, but especially around that elegant, old, ancient capital of Kyoto. One of the great outcomes of all of that social upheaval and political turmoil resulting from the natural disasters was a flourishing of literature. And one of the greatest works that came out of that period was a little book called Hojoki by the Buddhist priest Kamo no Chome, usually translated as the 10-foot hut. Chome sought to escape the chaos of the world, Thoreau-like, by going to the mountains and staying in a 10-foot hut. Focusing on the impermanence of the world and the unpredictability of life, Chome left a book of musings and meditations that has always brought me peace. So in the spirit of wellness, my friends, let us begin with a meditation from Hojoki by Kamo no Chome. I invite you to close your eyes and assume your favorite meditation position, as long as it's appropriate for the public. And I'll use my best meditation voice. On flows the river ceaselessly, nor does its water ever stay the same. The bubbles that float upon its pools now disappear, now form anew, but never endure long. And so it is with people in this world, and with their dwellings. Death in the morning, and at evening another birth. This is the way of things, no different from the bubbles on the stream. Did you feel it? Are you feeling it now? Are we lathered? Well, to get you further lathered, I know Dr. Kessler likes to talk about the mountains, and so Kamo no Chome was in the mountains in his mountain hut. This is how he described his hut. On quiet nights, the moon at my window recalls to me past friends, and tears wet my sleeve at the cries of the monkeys. Which basically describes, like, me standing out on my back porch right here in Farmville, like looking out in the trees, listening to those monkeys in the trees. The fireflies in the nearby grass blend their little lights with the fishermen's fires of distant Makinoshima. The sound of dawn rain comes to me like a storm wind in the treetops. When I hear the soft cry of the pheasant, it seems to me my own father or mother. The mountain deer that have learned to come so close reveal to me how distant from the world I have become. So that brings us back to the mountains. See, I told you it would come back to Dr. Kessler's theme. So fast forward just a bit from 1212. This event is supported by a grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, titled Wellbeing in the Heart of Campus, the brainchild of Research Services librarian Natalie Browning and Dean of Wellness Maureen Walls-McKay. Standing in the back, let's give them a round of applause. The project includes a series of wellness-themed events, including crocheting and journaling, which have been very well received. The next event will be gardening on May 4th at 3 p.m. in Greenwood Library. I got all of that right. Good for me. With that, it is my distinct honor to turn the conch shell to my good friend, Dr. Ken Perkins, Longwood Provost Emeritus and Director of Development and Academic Programs, who will introduce our speaker. Thank you very much and have a good evening. Dr. Perkins.
Good evening. It is my honor to introduce Dr. Renee Kessler. I can't remember exactly when Renee and I became friends. I know it was before the eagle claw fly rod that I gave her forever disappeared from her office. And that was about 20 years ago. Renee is a climber of mountains, as we know, but she also appreciates fly fishing. And I'm not sure how much the attitudes and aptitudes for mountain climbing overlap with fly fishing. But I will say that it takes some serious moxie to believe that you can fool a wary trout into thinking that a little thing made of a hook, thread, glue, and feathers is good to eat. In my mind, belief that you can trick a trout comes from the same place as the belief you can climb a mountain. Renee is a former Longwood University professor that has decided to spend, as she once told me, the last third of her life as a life coach and entrepreneur. She is using her over 40 years of outdoor adventure to speak and to write about leadership, team development, and personal development. She writes, I value the essence of desire and find that when people identify their desires and move toward them, their lives expand with richness. In a way, Renee helps people not to say, I should have done that. I wish I could have done that. Or I wish I would have done that. Her most recent book, Unflappable: Leadership Lessons from Climbing Mountains, is a beautiful example of these things. What I have come to understand about Renee's career at Longwood was that she was teaching in a way that led to what we call transformational learning, well before that term became popular in education. She is still at it, but now with different students, many older than the typical college student, many already established in their careers, but all yearning to expand their horizons. Dr. Kessler, thank you for coming back to Longwood. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Professor Emerita and Life Coach Extraordinaire, Dr. Renee Kessler.
We'll go back. Oh, thank you, Dr. Perkins, for that generous introduction. And
You're
I want
welcome.
to extend my gratitude again to Natalie Brown from the library and Dr. Marie Falls-Bouquet, wherever you are, Marie, for this invitation to present what I believe is what creates a meaningful life. And as you can see, for me, it's oftentimes found in the mountains. I find so much meaning in climbing mountains, being in the mountains, and being in nature. But I first want to recognize that I had a meaningful career here at Longwood. And I owe so much of it to the students. They helped me to be better and do better all the time. I had to show up, I had to be present, I had to keep up, I had to be on, I had to be present all of the time for them. And whoever is a former student here or someone who has seen me in a teaching role, I want to thank you for that and keeping me to that task. When I started here in 1986, Brock Commons was no Brock Commons. It was a through road that you could drive from the south end of campus to the north end of campus. And I worked in Lancer Hall. Then it was Lancer Hall, it's now Willard Hall. And I could park right up to the curb, get out of my car, and within a minute, I walked down the hallway at Willard Hall, into my office, and I was ready to work. Then Brock Commons was constructed. And I had to park away in a parking lot, and I had to pay for parking. Well, that didn't make sense. I had to park farther away and walk a distance and pay for parking. The point of that is that Longwood has grown in leaps and bounds in the last 35 years. A sleepy little town in the 80s, and Longwood was sort of a dot on the map somewhere. It is no longer a dot on the map. How about the Lancer basketball team, both Lancer women? And I can imagine that people from all over the country and perhaps the world who are Longwood graduates and had any kind of connection to Longwood watched those games. Yeah, and I certainly did in Colorado. So I think that was awesome. So what I'd like to do is spend the first couple minutes talking about me, and then we're going to transfer and talk about you. How about that? So I'll start with, when I was in college, I had this incredible opportunity to travel around the country with 13 other students that I did not know and visit different outdoor and environmental education centers from around the country. Now, I grew up in the Midwest, so most of our traveling had to do out west. So we went west from there. And within that semester, we also got to spend a month in the Wind River Mountains, where's Brooke? In the Wind River Mountains in Wyoming on a backpacking trip. Well, I never backpacked before, but I thought, this is kind of interesting. Okay, I get 16 hours of credit for an entire semester, and we get to travel about. We didn't have to read a book. We didn't have to take a test. We didn't have to write a paper. I thought, ooh, I'm in. I like this program, and I get 16 hours of credit. But we did have to keep a journal, and this was my journal. I still have it. I'm a sentimental girl, and I take things with me that are really valuable to me. So in this journal, we had to write notes about the classes that we took throughout the semester and what we learned from all these agencies, these recreational and outdoor and environmental education agencies, and then write about our skills and our experiences that we gained throughout that month-long semester, that month-long program of backpacking. We learned how to backpack and cross streams and learn how to cook outside and learned how to start a fire and pitch a tent, and about midway through that backpacking course, we had an opportunity to do some technical skills, rappelling and rock climbing. I said, ooh, you know, coming from the Midwest, I've never seen a mountain before, let alone climb one. So off we went, and in the morning, on October 1st, this is really gonna date many of us, including me, October 1st, 1977 was a really incredible day for me. That morning, we learned how to rappel, and I thought, oh, this is really fun. And this is my first rappel that you see here. And notice the Army surplus wear that we had. We all looked like we were from a military battalion, because all of us bought all of our clothes, not at REI, or any of those outdoor clothing stores. There was no Gore-Tex then, there's no lightweight clothing. Everything was from an Army surplus store. Everything was green wool pants, wool sweaters, wool hats, wool mittens. And remember those long underwear, cotton blend wool, where they button down the front and have a little flap in the back? Oh yeah, we wore those for an entire month. Everybody had a pair of those, right? And so we talked around and everybody had a blue wool hat beanie. And and then the boots, they were climbing shoes, they were steel shaped mountaineering boots, leather. So they were pretty weighty. So everything back then was pretty weighty for those of you spending time in the outdoors. So I had a blast doing rappelling. Well, that afternoon, our climbing instructor said, okay, who wants to climb a peak? That's, you know, we had hiked to the base of this peak and climbed. It was a little over 12,000 feet called Petroleum Peak. And I thought, ooh, I'm in, I've never done this before. I was all up for new adventures and new experiences. So me and 3 other students, off we went to the base of this peak. By the time we got there, remember we didn't leave until early afternoon. By the time we got there, the sun was beginning to go down in the western sky. And so the climbing instructor helped us tie our sea harnesses. In those days, they didn't have prefab harnesses. You had to tie them. And then one by one, we climbed up this peak. And there were 3 rope links to the top. So he would climb up to a rope link, set up an anchor, we would climb up, and then continue. Well, I was the last person in line. And you know, when you're the last person in line, you have to watch everybody else struggle going up the peak. So I was nervous because I saw other people like slipping and seeing how anxious they were. So by the time we all got to the top, it was nearly dark. And our climbing instructor wasted no time to get us back down. So he set up some anchors, we rappelled back down the mountain. By the time we got to the base of the mountain, it was pitch dark. We had one flashlight among us all. And off we went, back down through the boulder field. He helped us navigate through a boulder field and through these willows. And off in the distance, we could see the campfire glow of all the other students and the rest of the group waiting for us. And once we got there, they were so worried and concerned, for good reason. It was 11:30 at night and 16 degrees out, October 1st, 1977. I awakened the next morning and I said, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I just knew. Something just happened to me. And it was less about the climb. It was about what transpired within me, in my own soul, in my own spirit. I had direction for the first time. I had desire for the first time. I knew where I was going. At least in my spirit, I was going somewhere. And before that, before I started this course, before I started this leadership program, I was bumbling around like all the other people in my social circle. I was doing what everybody else was doing. If people went here, I went there. If people did this, I did this. And for the first time, I recognized I am set apart. Something has happened. It's like God pointed a lightning bolt into my spirit and said, wake up, Renee! And I did. And I said, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. So, this next, and I have been. I've been climbing mountains for 40, I don't know, some 45 years. And again, it's less about climbing the mountain, it's what transpires in the process. I use that as a vehicle because I was so excited about sharing what I learned and gained from that experience. What I was feeling, I wanted to share that with other people. And I wanted them to feel and experience the kinds of things that I was feeling and experiencing. My toughest climb was was in Nepal recently, and this was my 5th trip to Nepal, and I love Nepal, love the culture there. And I brought a Longwood scarf with me to the top of that peak. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life, physically. Now, I've been dreaming about this peak for 20 years. And I thought, man, why didn't you do this 20 years ago when you were 20 years younger? That would have been a smart thing to do, right? But I was 63 when I did that climb. And it was tough, very technical. I mean, just a tough, tough climb at over 20,000 feet in that elevation. That's pretty high, everybody. No, I didn't need oxygen, but sometimes I wish I could have had some oxygen on top of that. So, fast forward 9 years after I had that amazing transformation in my own life, I found this job in the Chronicle of Higher Education in Farmville, Virginia, and I thought, that's a funny name of a town. So I proceeded, and they were looking for someone to teach recreation courses in recreation administration, recreation leadership, in a therapeutic recreation program. And I would be the generalist. And they had one camping class listed there, and I said, ooh, my eyes went right to the camping class. And they were looking for a PhD candidate. Well, I had just finished my master's degree, but I thought, I can teach these classes. I'd never taught an academic class in my life. But I thought, they won't know that. I'm gonna go there and apply for that job. I was living in Texas at the time. I thought, what the heck? So I got an interview, it was the end of July. I actually think Longwood was desperate because classes were starting mid-August. Well, I got hired for the job because for sure they must have been desperate. Well, I got the job. 1-year appointment. 1 year turned into 3 years, turned into 5 years. And I couldn't stay without a PhD. So I had to go away for 2 years, asked for a 2-year leave of absence, went to Michigan State, pursued my PhD, came back, and 5 years turned into 15 years, turned into 30 years. Crazy how that happened. I mean, I look back and I think, I don't know how that happened. Why? Because it was purpose for me. Always went back to that climb on October 1st, 1977. It was purpose, it was purpose, it was desire, it was divine, whatever it was, but it kept me going. And I had such a, as I said at the beginning, such a meaningful career here at Longwood. I wouldn't have done it differently. And I owe so much to the students. Former student here, right here. By the way, how many of you are current students? Raise your hand. See, I like these people. See? Yeah. How many of you are faculty? Okay, good. How many of you retired faculty? Okay. How many of you are community people? Okay, good. Hi, community people. How many of you are a community of somewhere? Yeah, we're all part of that. Anyway, I wanted to say at the beginning too, thank you all for coming. This has been, we're done. No, I'm kidding. But thank you all for coming. It means a lot to me. So, back to the story. So Longwood, and so these are my signature poses. For those of you who are on social media, you know this pose. And it's my favorite pose. And it says a lot, doesn't it? It says victory, success, joy. But what you don't see the struggle. You don't see the perseverance. You don't see the determination. You don't see the focus that it requires for you or anybody to get where you want to go, your desire, your summit. And a summit can be anything you want it to be. For me, it's a mountain, but there's been a zillion other summits in my life, and I couldn't have done it. If I hadn't, for me, I could not have been where I wanted to go without having climbed so many mountains, because of what it requires to get there. And I use that same focus and that same determination, that same perseverance in everything that I pursue. But I gotta have purpose. I have to have desire. I have to have want to be able to do what it is that I want to do. And it's not about me. Purpose is not about being happy. You can't, it's a byproduct. But if people say, well, my purpose is I'm going to be happy. Well, then you just shortchanged the rest of the world, because purpose is about how you give out to other people. What's the value in your purpose to other people? It's not you, you're not the Lone Ranger. It really extends itself to the world around you. So, these are just in the last couple of years. So multiply those pictures, 40 years. I have a lot of those. Can you believe it? I have. Yeah. Brooke, when you come back out, we'll do some climbs.
Awesome.
So it's been fun. I can't say that. So let's talk about the 5 essential elements of well-being, since this is the purpose of this presentation, is on well-being. Well, I thought about this and I said, well, this isn't anything new. So Gallup poll, see the horse? Gallup poll. It's a collection of people's opinions, right? Statistical opinions of people out there. And people out there believe that these are the 5 categories. Makes sense, right? Career, social, financial, physical, and community. You know, if you're in a career that's stimulating and it's engaging and you're working with colleagues and people who are supportive and they want to help you grow and you're in the right environment and there's lots of opportunities to grow and extend yourself, you're in the right place. Social, if you're around people who support you and encourage you, you want to be in that kind of environment and community. Financial, you spend some, you save some, you give some, right? All kinds of statistics about that. Well, I think you're supposed to save 20% and you're supposed to spend 50% and you're supposed to give 10. I don't know. I just think it's moderation in everything, right? So financial, if you're financially well, physically, that includes both your diet, how you take in food that gives you the energy and well-being to continue to function well, and then physical exercise. So kind of a balance with that. And I'm a snicky snack girl. I love some sticky snacks. Anybody else a snicky snack person? Chips and salsa? That is my weakness. That is my weakness. Chips and salsa. I go to a Mexican restaurant and I fill up on chips and salsa and then I can't eat. Because I just keep, you like that? I love the crunch. It's just yummy. So, balance, I always think balance in food and in exercise. You know, that's just everything in moderation. And then community. You know, for Here Faces, church, however you give back to your community, how the community gives back to you, it's just extending that. Yeah, so you get the idea of well-being. We're always thinking about that. And it's a balance between all of those things, right? But I want to extend that by thinking about 5 essential elements of being well. I think there's a difference of being well because it's in the eye of the beholder. And I want to share with you what I believe is how being well and what being well means to me. So, 1 is purpose. We're going to talk about each one of these specifically. Non-negotiables. I talked a little bit about non-negotiables this morning. And then choose your thoughts. Oh, there's so much power in choice. So much power in choice. Make connections. And then spend time in nature. That's not a secret for people who know me. Gotta spend time in nature. What it does for people's spirit and overall being well. So let's talk about purpose. How many of you think you have a purpose? Overall purpose in your life. You just know it, you feel it, you sense it. It's an eye-opener for some people. You really, you just definitively know it. It's a knowing. So there's 2 examples that I want to give, and one is Steve Harvey. Everybody know who Steve Harvey is? He's a comedian, right? The host of Family Feud and that show Little Big Shots. Oh, I love that show. He was so good with the kids, wasn't he? And so I heard an interview of him a couple of months ago. And he tells this story. It's his beginnings, early 20s. I think he had already had a child. He was kind of not doing so well in his life. He was directionless. And he was writing jokes for a comedian. And so one day the comedian said, you know, why don't you come to the comedy club tonight, Steve? And just sit in the audience. And Steve's like, oh, thanks for the invitation for me to come. And you can hear your jokes. And Steve's like, oh, okay. So he and a friend drove to the comedy club, and they're sitting in the audience, and all of a sudden the comedian says, Steve, points him out in the audience, come on up here. And he was shocked. He didn't anticipate to get up on stage and tell some jokes. And Steve's like, I don't know what I'm going to say. And he thought, well, there are a few jokes that I didn't write about, that I didn't give him, that I will say up on stage. So Steve told a couple of jokes, and something, a lightning bolt. You know that lightning bolt when you climb a mountain? A lightning bolt hit him. And when I heard his interview, I thought, he's telling my story. He's got the same thing. And they're driving home, he and his friends, they were driving home, his friend looked over to him in the passenger seat. He's like, hey buddy, what's going on? Steve was crying. He said, you don't understand. You don't understand what's happening. It's indescribable. When you recognize what your calling is, what your purpose is, you just know. It's a knowing, it's a knowing, it's a knowing. And it is, for me, a lightning bolt. And then, how about our basketball coach, our male basketball coach? If you've read any articles about him, same thing. What did he do? He left an $800,000 job to be a basketball coach. From $800,000 to $32,000 to begin. One of his buddies that he met at Hampton-Sydney. And then guess what? Within years, a couple of years here, boom, NCAA. It's huge for Longwood. But he talks about this in his article, and I wanted to share it, what he said about purpose and calling. Because he refers to it very similarly as Steve Harvey and I do. It's important that when you realize what your personal calling might be, you take action on it. Sometimes it's continuing to do the same thing that you're doing, but with a different perspective. Aldrich says, and sometimes it's a dramatic shift, like mine. He always had in the back of his mind, basketball, basketball, basketball. It's not that he didn't like what he was doing as a lawyer. He was very successful, obviously, because he made $1 zillion, right? But it wasn't about the money. It wasn't about fame. It was about here. And he used basketball. Steve Harvey used being a comedian. I used climbing as a vehicle to make a difference in the lives of other people. And I knew it, I knew it, I knew it 40 years ago. I just knew it. I didn't know what it looked like, but I knew I wanted to share it with other people. I knew that I wanted to make a difference for other people, a good difference, an impactful difference, an influential difference. So, and I know from reading him, I'm going to go over and meet Griff Aldrich. I'm sure he's somewhere over in your building over there, Todd. And then one last person that I want to mention is Jim Carrey. He's a comedian too. His mission statement, very short: free people from worry. That's it. That's his purpose. Free people from worry. He's a comedian. He uses that as a vehicle, but he's a graduation speaker. He does all sorts of things. But his whole mission, his whole purpose in life is to free. He's written 4 words, 5 words: free people from worry. Boom. So every decision he makes from that point on is easy for him. And if it doesn't have to do with how he frees people from worry, he says no. He's not going to go off track from what his purpose is, right? So you know, and that's the beauty of having a purpose. Is you don't have to think about, is this valuable? Should I do this? Should I not do this? Because you already know. You've already defined your purpose. Yeah. All right, well, let's go back here. Okay, so what are your strengths? If you're still discovering, and you're not baddies if you don't have your purpose, that's okay, you're gonna live. But if you're thinking about it, and you're wondering, well, I'm not sure what my purpose is, start asking yourself these questions, and ask other people. Hey Sally, hey Joe, what are my gifts? What are my talents? What have I given you? What have you seen in me? And they will tell you. They will help you to help you discover what your direction is in your purpose. What ignites your passion and drive? You know it as soon as you're in it and you experience it, it's there, it's there. Don't pass it up. Listen to it. You gotta pay attention. You gotta pay attention to that. 2 books that I would recommend. Rick Warren's book on the purpose-driven life. Anybody ever read that book? Purpose-driven life, yeah. It's very Christian-based. And then I think in the first 2 weeks, it made like $10 million, sold like $10 million, or 10 million copies of that book. And it was on the bestseller, New York bestseller list for 90 weeks. That's like less than 2 years. 2 years. That's amazing. That's amazing. Why? Because people want to know what their purpose is. It's what Mark Twain said. 2 most important days of your life are the day that you were born and the day you discover why. And it just becomes relaxing. You become a little bit more inflexible when you have an idea of where you're going, who you are. And I can't think of anybody in this room. I can't imagine. Because you talk about that in your dormitory, your residence halls, or as you're driving to the next soccer game, or wherever. Like, who am I? Where am I going? Why am I in this earth to do? Those are valid questions. People ask those kinds of questions to each other. So this is a great book. And then Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. Everybody read that book? That's a cool old book, man. And for those of you who don't know him, he was a Holocaust survivor, was in 4 different concentration camps, and witnessed all around him darkness and death and sorrow and debilitation and just loneliness. And he worked hard at keeping meaning in his life the whole time he was there, and it started here. He thought about his wife, even though he probably knew that she had perished along with his parents, and he envisioned what it would be like after getting out of the concentration camp to see what life would be like. He was envisioning himself having speaking engagements. His background is in psychology, and he was looking at the brightness, and that's what brought meaning and happiness to him. But it's all his mindset. He worked hard at that. Yes, all those kinds of dark things were happening around him. And so, very spiritually based, for sure. And both of those books, I think, I would highly recommend for those of you who are on the hunt and search for meaning and purpose. So, non-negotiables, what are those? Like, how do you start your day? I used to do these Tidbit Tuesdays on Facebook and social media, and during COVID, and I did 52 of them for an entire year during COVID. And the reason why I did these Tidbit Tuesday, there were 2 to 3 minute videos about something positive or something for the people to look at and read about, something that's positive and something that's would add to someone's life. And one of these was non-negotiables. And I talked about how Chris Davis, who's a former student of mine and is on the alumni board, I think, here at Longwood, and still very in touch with Longwood, said, well, I make my bed every day. That was non-negotiable for him. Anybody consider that as a non-negotiable for you? I like that. How about the rest of you over here? Making your bed. And he seen that was really valuable. And I never thought of it, but I make my bed every day. But there's something about that routine and that ritual. Making your bed every day. You start your day off right. It's not a mess. You've actually cleaned up something before you leave the house. Well, for me, I'm a person of faith, so I spend time by myself every single morning, just with me, in peace, in quiet, in prayer, in devotions. I also write in a journal, or I continue to write in journals. I might listen to a podcast, something that's positive, something that just sets the tone for the day. It doesn't have to be hours, people. It can just be 15 minutes. And maybe you have to get up a little bit longer. But I will guarantee that if you set time aside in the morning by yourself, find your own little chair, find your own little room, find your own little corner in your house, it will make a difference. And how you respond to other people and the decisions that you make throughout the day, it makes a difference. But give yourself some credit and some time by yourself, because you are most important to the world, yourself. You have to be happy and content with yourself before you go out there and charge the world and make a difference, because it really starts with you. So, boundaries. Recognize what your boundaries are. We talked a little bit about that this morning too, but boundaries. Where's the boundary line here for you? Who steps over that, and how have you stepped over other people's boundaries? Sometimes you don't know what your boundaries are until they've already been stepped over, right? But those are something to pay attention to, because you're cheating yourself if you allow people to step over things that you don't agree with, or that you don't value, or you don't believe in, right? So I want you to turn to the next person that you're sitting with and just tell them, say, no, I'm not doing this. Doesn't that feel good? There's power in no. How many of you have said yes to something and you're like, why did I say that? Why did I do it? Yeah. We do it all the time, but every time you're chipping away your value system. You're chipping away what you believe. You're chipping away, and you don't owe anybody, no obligation, really. You have to just tell yourself that. It's okay to say no. Yes, it's nice to say yes, if you mean it. Of course, it's good to say yes, but you know, when you get in the habit of saying no, when you want to say no and you need to say no, that's really valuable. And it saves so much of the quality of your own time. And then validate your priorities. It's like recognize what your top 3 priorities are. It's family, or your faith, or your friends, or your soccer team, or the students in your classes. What are your priorities? And they may shift a little bit depending on deadlines and those kinds of things, but know what your priorities are. And try to keep to them as best as you can. Because if you don't, again, you're cheating yourself in that. And then you have to get back on the trail when you're way off and you've created some other priorities that have nothing to do with your value system and where you're going and where your mission is and what your purpose is. And then show up. I put show up. This is important to me. I love it when people show up. Show up in lots of different ways, not just physically, but emotionally, psychologically. Just, are you with me? Show up. And there's so much leadership involved in that. When people show up, speaks volumes to who they are and how they present themselves in a leadership position. And showing up, be present. Choose your thoughts. I like this one because choice, there's so much power in choice. Don't we love to choose things rather than being told what to do all the time? What would you like for dinner? Oh, the world opens up, doesn't it? What kind of snicky snack do you want today? How the world opens up. Something about choice gives people some great power. And you can choose your own thoughts. What goes in here oftentimes comes out here. Right? You know this. This is speaking to the choir. But this is damaging for many of us if we don't pay attention to. We have the power to choose the kinds of thoughts that we have. Not what if, or who we are, or I'm not enough of this, and I'm too much of that, and no, it's being able to stand up for your own self and choose. I'm pretty good stuff. So tell the person next to you, I'm hot stuff. And then this is kind of secret for people too, but attitude. How about attitude? You know, it used to be when I started working in a professional setting that people looked at skills and your degrees and what kinds of talents you bring to the job. But I'm telling you today, it's not that, it's been switched. People look at attitude because you can teach someone, you can train someone's skills, right? So something crazy like a high percent, like 85% of the success of people in a profession is their attitude. Their attitude. It's tough to train an attitude. You can train someone with skills. And don't take things personally. I put this in here because it's really been helpful for me. And recognize that when someone is unkind to you, the likelihood of something going on in their life that's not pleasant, you just happen to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. But don't take it personally. I would venture to say, I don't know if this is a real statistic, 90% of the time, it's about the other person. It has nothing to do with you. Nothing to do. My sister was a volleyball coach, and she worked with another volleyball coach, and she would call me up on the phone, and she's like, God, this woman's so rude to me. She swears at her kids, and she's rude to me, and I thought, okay, Bonnie, my name's Bonnie. I would say, there's got to be something going on in her life. She might have had a rough childhood. Maybe she's going through a divorce. Something for her to, there's no reason why she needed to be that rude and angry to my sister, but there's something going on. So when we talk about meaning, it starts with you. And really work at not taking things personally, because it's generally about the other person. And then think about what you're giving. Is there value to other people? What is the value you're bringing to other people in all that you do? You've got that purpose. It's not about being happy. It's how you make other people happy, because through that, happiness erupts because of the value you're bringing to other people. And then I use this term, think blue and you see blue. If you think you're not good enough, then chances are you're not good enough. If you think you are not going to make it, you're not going to get that job, you're going to fail that next test, okay, maybe you will, because you're thinking that. If you bought a Tesla, chances are you're going to see a Tesla everywhere on the road. Right? I have a Subaru. I see Subarus everywhere because I own a Subaru, right? You guys own a Subaru, don't you? Yeah. So you get that. So think blue, you see blue. You get out of that mindset. Change the way you look at things, and the things that you look at change. One of my favorite all-time quotes by Wayne Dyer. Making connections. And I used this book, I bought this book a couple of months ago called Nice Bike. And it's about this man who went to a bike rally, motorcycle rally. Ken? And he would see another bike and a person standing by it, and he would say, hey, nice bike. And the person would raise their hand and they'd have a nice little conversation, and it was just such a neat engagement. They weren't best friends, they probably will never see each other again, but just that interaction made a difference. I remember standing in Walmart several years ago, and this young girl was standing in front of me, and she was beautiful, tall, thin, beautiful colored skin. Her hair was just so, and she was waiting in line like the rest of us, and I couldn't help but say, I said, have you thought about modeling school? And immediately she said, well, yes, ma'am, I have. But just that connection did something to her, I would venture to say. If I had said nothing, she wouldn't have remembered that, but it gave her an extra little, okay, someone has recognized something that I have, that maybe that'll give me a little extra oomph to go look at modeling school. Yeah. So think about the connections that you make with people. You don't have to be best friends with them. I often wonder why people don't talk to each other in their airplanes anymore. They sit right next to each other for 2 or 3 hours and no one says a word. Does anybody recognize that? When I first started flying, everybody was always chatting with people next to each other. It doesn't happen anymore. And there's something that's been lost in that translation. Acknowledge others. For colleagues and faculty or staff, when someone in your department or somewhere across campus, they've done something amazing, write them a note. Just tell them, look, I'm congratulating you. Congratulations, Heather, for becoming full professor. I just got that out. Otherwise, I would have written you like, whatever that was. But it makes a difference. It doesn't have to be long, it doesn't have to be lovey, just like, hey, I acknowledge you. It makes a difference for people. It's not about you, it's about other people. You soccer players. Oh my gosh, how many times has someone made a great kick or all the time, right? And they're saying, good job, right? Yeah. Because your coach is telling you to do that. You acknowledge other people, you support other people. Yeah. Be curious. I love this. I love the idea of being curious. Think about that in conversations when you're connecting with people. What do people like to answer? They like to answer questions. It's easier for people to talk when you ask them a question. Larry, why do you have a beard like that? And Larry's got an answer, I'm sure, you know. But the point is that ask people, engage them. Why? Because you're curious. It's neat to be curious about other people, what they do, who they are, where they're from, and then be consistent in your manners and how you interact with people. I can't tell you how many people over my life that I have seen one day, and they're in a different mood or different disposition the next day. Anybody know people like that? You're not quite sure how to respond to them. But if you're the person who's consistent in how you interact with people and how you approach people, it's going to help other people feel safe and comfortable in your presence. And that's all part of making connections as well. And then, spend time in nature. How do you do spend time in nature? I mean, yeah. What does that mean? You have to climb a mountain and spend time in nature? No, you don't have to. But there is so much awe in nature. There's all kinds of surprises, but you have to pay attention. We can't just like speed work down the trail or in the garden or wherever you're going. Spend some time, and I know people talk with each other. I think that's great because there's so much therapy, I think, in just walking down a nature trail, particularly in the spring when everything's blooming and the flowers are out and the smells are alive. All those things have so much impact on one's overall well-being and contributes to people's meaning in their life. So when you get locked up in your dorm room and you're studying for a test, take a break, go outside, wander around in something that smells really pleasant and natural, and you'll be a whole new person when you get back. So have an adventure, do something new, step out of your comfort zone. I love going to nature because it's new every single time. I can go down the same trail, but it's new every single time because I'm looking for something different. The weather's different. The nests in the trees have changed. Whatever it is, but it's different. So do something new. It makes a difference in people's lives. And lastly, be inflammable. You all have a book. So, and in that book, you'll have the story of where the title of the book came from. When I was teaching a wilderness course back in 1981, someone said to me, in a decision that I was making, someone who was twice my age, who was a PhD in outdoor education from California, said, "You are inflammable." I was taking a group of people up on a climb, and I couldn't decide whether to take them up or stay where we are or retreat because the weather, it was dark off in the western sky, and I thought, man, if we start this climb and lightning comes in and it starts to rain, it's going to be really dangerous. And I was, traipsing back and forth between the side of the mountain and back to the group, the side of the mountain, just being quiet and thinking about it. Finally, somebody said, "You are inflammable." And I never heard that. I was 24. And they said, I never heard the word. I said, that sounds a weird word, inflammable. And so that's when I learned the definition of inflammable. And I took it as a compliment. That I didn't feel anxious. I didn't feel anxious. I was really absorbing what it is that I was going to do. Because I realized, particularly during COVID, a lot of people got anxious during COVID. Because there was so much uncertainty, right? But guess what? Every day is uncertain. You can't predict every day. You just can't. It's uncertain anyway. So what made COVID? Yes, it's extreme. Yes, I understand that. But something about being the person who's unflappable when you're making decisions and then you're in the company of other people, it has a ripple effect. It calms everybody else in your company. But if you're the person who's anxious and worried and crazed about what's happening, it does crazy stuff for everybody else too. So there's power in being inflammable, particularly in a leadership position, particularly when you're making decisions. And so, be free, be inflammable. And as I was taught years ago, go smoke a cigarette. Now, my instructor back in those days, everybody smoked. And he was much older than I was, and he would say, smoke a cigarette. So he would pretend like he had a cigarette, and he'd sit there on a rock, and there's an emergency situation that we had to attend to. And he'd sit on a rock and, pretend doing this for I don't know, how long does it take to smoke a cigarette? 2 or 3 minutes? Instead of running and being the hero in the situation, it allowed people just to. And if you've noticed, people who are paramedics and EMTs, you see them running up to a house? Absolutely not. I have never seen a paramedic or an EMT run up to a house. They have their bag and they're walking like this. They're not running, they're not anxious, it's not building that anxiety among them. So there's something to be said about being inflammable. And lastly, I want to talk about my 2 books, What's Inside. The first one that I wrote was published during COVID, actually the spring of COVID. And I had just finished that climb that you saw, my toughest climb in 2019. And I came back and I was on fire. I discovered the will I didn't know I had, because it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. And I came back and I wrote that book in a week. It's not a big book, it's a little tiny book, itty bitty book. But it took me no time, but it's really steps in how you reach your summit. And how I identify what a summit is whatever your goal or aspiration or desire, your dream out there you want to go for it. And so I sort of outline the steps as if I'm climbing a mountain. But it applies to every other person's life. And you start with identify your summit, where do you want to go, and then why. And the why is what you purpose. Why do you want to do that summit? Does it align with your why? So those first 2 chapters are really key. And then it continues on with how valuable planning and preparation is, and the power of reflection. And once you get to the top of the summit, you got to come back down. Because if you don't come back down, you don't have other summits to reach. Right? You can't stay up there and be in euphoria for the next 3 years of your life. Ooh, I graduated. Ooh, I still graduated. Ooh, I graduated. Ooh, I graduated. You gotta come down so you can graduate somewhere else, right? Or go to the next summit. So it's a point-by-point book. And then this one, Inflammable, is I share 9 mountaineering stories about climbs that I've done over my life. They're just 9 of them. They're not all of them, just 9 of them. And about the mistakes that I made as a leader and what I gleaned from those mistakes related to leadership. From making assumptions, the dangers of making assumptions, from what it means to be a team and the value of a team, and all the characteristics about leadership. And I spend a lot of time talking about character and who your influences are, and the power of having a mentor for you young people. If you don't have a mentor yet, you gotta go find them. Don't continue on without finding a mentor, because they're out there, but you gotta be the person seeking them as well. And there's a lot of power in having a mentor. And then I really believe in this influence without character is dead in leadership. And leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. You don't have to have a title, you don't have to have a position, you don't have to be a CEO of anything, you have to have influence. And influence is leadership. Anybody, regardless, it's very little to do with titles and positions. It's about how you influence other people, where you are. And I believe character is the crux of influence. Good character. Because a lot of people have a lot of influence. But the character could be questionable. And then their leadership ends eventually. Yeah, I believe that. So that's my second book. And I think I might have done it. I don't know. There might be another one coming. So pursue your summits, people. And thank you for attending.
Thank you, Renee. And I know Renee would field a few questions that we might have for her. So any questions about her adventures, questions about things she's learned along the way, about any of the wisdom that she gave us this evening? A couple of questions.
still kayaking?
Are you?
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, you got me into it.
Are you still canoeing?
I'm not canoeing. I need to come on out. Let's do some canoeing. Not yet, a canoe's still up in the garage.
Where was the picture taken? The background here,
The
the
Tetons.
background.
Tetons, the Grand Tetons. The Grand Tetons.
Okay.
Well, you're in the back country of the Tetons. It's a little different viewpoint, but yeah. Pam! Hi.
Hi, Fran.
Hi.
What is your most recent surprise? Can you repeat the
Oh,
question? What is your
climbing?
most recent surprise climbing? Like something that was like, oh,
Well, I would say the biggest surprise was that the climb that I did in 2019, and I've climbed since then. But that surprise, recognizing the extent of my will. I didn't know that I had that kind of will. And you don't know until you're really, really challenged to the point where you wonder. And so I recognized how much I wanted to get to the summit of that. And that's when you discover your will and desire. So that's a good question.
I want you to know I texted Chris Davis, so I'm waiting to hear back from him that you mentioned his name.
Yes.
So I'll say what he says.
About making his bed.
Yes.
You'll say it, great. Yeah, Ben.
Renee, when you walked the John Muir Trail and you had horrible blisters and
First time.
the summit was worse, climbing the summit was worse.
Oh, yes. I would say worse. I don't think of it as worse.
I mean, did you have physical problems that you had when you were
I mean, I was at 20,000 feet, so I had a hard time breathing. And then when you're at 20,000 feet, it's half the oxygen available that you have at sea level at 20,000 feet. So you're really taking in as much oxygen as you can. So it feels like you had no strength and that you've not worked out or prepared physically for the climb, because the oxygen isn't going all throughout your body to give you the energy and strength to continue to climb. So the blisters were no problem. It was tough, yeah.
I think about you every time I get a blister.
I love that.
Renee,
Yep.
either in the mountains or in nature, you ever see something, or what have you seen where you said to yourself, I cannot believe what I just saw?
I've seen bear, lots of bear, yeah. You know what come to mind is a little baby, tiny little hummingbird nest. Have people seen a little baby, tiny hummingbird nest? Oh, it is spectacular. And they're so tiny, the little babies that are in it are like, you know, that was so special. That is awe. That's awe. I mean, awe. Have you seen awe? Have you guys seen awe? Like something really incredible in nature that just makes you go, oh. No? Okay, you gotta get out there.
When you were climbing and you found yourself like in a difficult spot or time, like what would you say to yourself or do to keep going?
Unflappable. I mean, that's key. Because you could psych yourself. I used to teach climbing here for 30 years. And take them up to Shenandoah Park. And students go halfway up the peak and they get the sewing machine late, get really nervous, really angry. I can't go in, I'm gonna fall! Because they've gotten anxious. So it's like, gotta breathe, man, gotta breathe. And change their thinking, choose their thinking. They're not gonna fall, they're not gonna fall over their death. Their thinking is power. And I would always tell them, talk to your feet. Tell your feet to stay. And they give it up. Yes, that's exactly what needed to happen. It worked. I told you to stay and they did. I mean, there's power in that. Yeah, good question. Yeah.
Hi, I saw your picture with the carnivores. I'm assuming you've done 14 years. I just wanted to know how
Which
many.
ones?
And how many?
Since I've lived in Colorado,
Yeah.
16, 17, something like that.
Okay.
There's a bunch of them though.
Yeah.
What would be really scary for you? you're used to doing. But think of something that may be real common in my life or somebody else's life that would be really scary.
That's common in somebody else's life? That's scary?
Yeah, I mean, it may not be that unusual.
Well, oftentimes I would ask students, what's your greatest fear? And I get them in groups and they would share what their greatest fear is. And mine would be being trapped underwater.
Trapped under.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't know why.
Well,
It
all of
just
us would be.
That's that.
What's that? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Ever been on a climb or expedition of some sort where you're like, we might not make it?
Of danger or because of weather?
Anything like life and death.
Never have.
Good for you.
Yeah, never have. Weather, a couple times that I couldn't make it to the top of the retreat. But then I would go another time when the weather was good, because I like not getting to the summit.
Yeah.
I'm kind of stubborn that way.
The high altitude climb is so unpredictable with weather, how you just react to altitude, and you do it so much. I was just wondering if it was ever a close call with that.
No, there hasn't been, but that's a good question. And I hope, knock on wood. But, I kind of like being in precarious situations too. Not danger, not like I'm gonna lose my life, but, when the weather's bad, because then you're so tuned in, you're so focused on making the decision. You're not thinking about what you're gonna have for lunch or, what your parents are doing at home and what TV shows are on. You're so focused on that. And there's some real gratitude in that kind of focus. Soccer players know what I'm talking about. You know what it's like when you play a game of soccer and you're totally focused on the game. And then you're like, whoa! That feels good to be that focused, doesn't it? It's flow. It's that flow concept. Yeah. It's the same sort of thing with climbing.
So what's your next summit?
I'm planning to climb the Matterhorn in July.
Where's
The
it?
Matterhorn is Switzerland. Yeah, excited. It's a beautiful mountain. Very picturesque mountain. What's that?
Takes a week all of it.
Any other questions?
Have you had a chance to get to Yosemite?
I'm going in June again.
Half Dome, loved it. Did the
Uh,
cable on the other side.
What's that?
I did the cable on
Yeah.
the amateur side.
I think it's great. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I did it
I've
too.
never seen a view like that in my life.
With the gloves at the bottom of that. That's
All
a
the
great
falls,
climb.
fertile.
All right, who's going climbing? Anybody? Come on, everybody. I know you do. You guys like the outdoors? You like it dirty, rolling in the mud and stuff? Elizabeth does too. Don't you like rolling in the mud? Thank you all. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming. I know Renee will be out at the reception signing your books, and she also has the first book available for sale. If you're wanting the itty bitty.
It's the itty bitty. It's only $5.